let's talk now about the debate between the northern free states and the southern slave states. By this time, 1787, we see that slavery has been abolished in most of the northern states. That the Mason-Dixon line, the border between Maryland and Pennsylvania, is a rough line in the sand between what's free states and slave states. And northern states say that, well, you're going to have slavery and you're going to treat people as property, and you're going to deny the slaves natural rights and citizenship, then you shouldn't count them in your census. You shouldn't count them in your population. Because if you do, then you're going to have more power in the House of Representatives. If every slave is counted in Virginia, for example, then Virginia has a lot more representation in the House than, say, Pennsylvania. The Northerners say you can't have it both ways. If you want to say they're not people, they don't have rights, we can do all these oppressive, horrible things to them, then you can't count them as people. You can't say they're not people, but the census person is around, count them as a person. Doesn't make sense. So this is a way that the Northerners try to put a check on the Southerners. The Southerners, and when we're talking about slave states, that's Delaware, Maryland, and South. Yeah, slavery existed in Delaware, right next to New Jersey. Not in large numbers, but there was slaves. So all these states had a slave-based economy. Their economy was based off of forced labor of a large group of people. People who are forced to work without pay, without compensation, who can be bought and sold like property, who can be treated horribly and have their rights denied, a right to an education denied, a right to have a family denied. Essentially, your family can be sold out from you at any different time. Your children become the property of the slave owner. Your movement, your speech, all of this is bitterly oppressed. And the Southerners want the slaves to be counted in the population. They don't want them to be treated as people, but they want them to be counted as people. Kind of hypocritical, yes. Not kind of, hypocritical. But their argument, which is a bit disgusting, is that, well, we feed and shelter and clothes. We take care of the slaves. That we should be rewarded for taking care of these slaves and for all that we do to help them. Messed up. And therefore they should be counted. But the real reason why they want the slaves counted is because if you don't count the slaves, the Northerners, which have a lot more cities, will have what they feel an unfair advantage in the House of Representatives. And what would they do? Well, the Northerners have already shown that they want to get rid of slavery. So they fear if the North has more members in Congress, that in the end, they'll get rid of slavery and that would hurt their economy. So really, they want to count the slaves so they can continue owning the slaves. Again, messed up. So they come up with a compromise. This compromise is called the 3/5 compromise, which is a fraction, 3 out of 5. So the compromise is 3 out of every 5 slaves will be counted in the census. So if you have 5 slaves lined up, you see the illustration here, you have 5 slave owners and you have 5 slaves. All 5 of the slave owners are counted, but 3 of the 5 slaves are counted towards the population. Yep. That's it's messed up. Another way of looking at it is that each slave is counted as 3/5 of a person. You're not a person, you're just 3/5 of a person. And this gives the South a lot more protection in the House of Representatives and keeping the system of slavery. The North will have a slight advantage in the House, but they'll both be equal in the Senate, and they'll never have as much of an advantage that they can do anything to really limit slavery or slave trade within the colonies. In fact, the Constitutional Convention never really deals with this issue of slavery at all. It doesn't put the word slavery in the Constitution. And just leaves it with future generations to deal with, much like they did with the Declaration of Independence. And we're going to see when future generations eventually deal with it, it'll be the bloodiest, worst war in our history, the U.S. Civil War. This issue of slavery will continue to rise up again and again and again, and have multiple other compromises, like the Missouri Compromise of 1850, to try to deal with how slave states and free states would be represented in Congress. The Constitutional Convention does deal with a couple other issues with slavery. They do set that the international slave trade would be outlawed in the United States. No more new slaves would be coming in after a date in the early 1800s. But in return, northern states had to help with apprehending fugitive slaves. So you might not like slaves, but you better not help slaves or you're breaking the law. Or you might not like slavery, but you better not help the slaves or you'll be breaking the law. Nice. So I saw this illustration. This also kind of gets the idea that if you are a free person living in the South, you're counted as a person. If you're a slave, you're counted as 3/5 of a person. So, question for you at the end of the lesson is, should the members of the Constitutional Convention been willing to compromise on the issue of slavery in order to continue to move the Constitution forward and to keep the Union together, the Union? Defend your answer and write it down on the comments underneath. Thanks for watching. Have a great one.